All this time under the same roof, and I never imagined it. Not until that night. Pastor Miguel's voice on the phone was low and accusing. "Sister Diana, your soul is condemned. The visions I had show you have harbored the enemy in your home." My whole body trembled, not from fear but from a deep, steady conviction only years of walking with God can give. I hung up the phone with my hands sweating and my heart pounding. Through the slightly open living room door I caught my son-in-law Ricardo's face for a heartbeat, a thin smile, a glance that felt like cold glass. Then the scent of incense, foreign and sweet, drifted past me. I understood in that instant, the battle was not from outside. It was hidden beneath my roof, in the hands of someone I had taken in as family. In that quiet, I chose not to back down. My faith would be my sword. I am Diana Ferreira, and I have kept a simple rhythm to my days for longer than many remember. I wake before the sun and give thanks. The morning light comes thin through the curtains, and for a long time that light was all the world I needed. I learned to pray at my mother's knee. I learned to make bread and to mend a dress while whispering a psalm. Those practices became the architecture of my life. Prayer, work, service. The three pillars I set down early and never moved. Our house is an old story folded into a small plot of land. There are sodden footsteps that remember my husband Eduardo's passing, the echo of good afternoons, the soft creak that reminds me the porch has settled with us. The Bible sits on the living room table on a small wooden stand. I never close it if I can help it. A ribbon mark rests where a psalm waits for the day. Neighbors know my door to be open. People come for coffee and leave lighter. I have always believed a kitchen can be a sanctuary. I have listened to confessions over the steam of a pot and prayed over births and funerals with identical hands. Beatriz grew up in those rooms. She used to run down the hallway with scraps of paper clutched in her fist, full of questions about God and the world. When she married Ricardo, they promised to honor us both. They moved in after Eduardo died, and I thought of our house as fuller, not smaller. I do not speak of myself with pride. I only say what is true. I kept faith as my work. I woke to pray and to intercede for others. I believed God was near, more near than the wood of the table or the taste of coffee. That belief was not a performance, it was a manner of breathing. There are small things that shape a life. I hang a particular psalm by the kitchen window where the light hits it at dawn. A small rosary, not flashy, hangs near the door, not as a charm but as a reminder to cross myself before I go out. My hands know the texture of the pages I read each night. Habit became holiness. The neighborhood smelled of jasmine in spring and frying oil on market days. Children kicked a ball near my gate. The dog across the street barked at 6 sharp. Daily life was as ordinary and as holy as any prayer. Routine was my tether. The faith of my early years was not loud, it was steady. And yet, even steady things show hairline cracks when strain comes. There were small oddities first, so small that you could have called them nothing and kept on. I noticed them because my life was full of small things. The lamp in the hallway would be slightly askew, the stitch on the curtain would be undone for a day. A spoon would hide under the tea towel. These are trivialities until they weave a net of unease. The household noise that once lulled me began to hitch, as if someone were learning a new rhythm and I had not been invited to join. One morning I found the kitchen windowsill wet and cold, though the morning had been dry. I dried it and told myself that loss makes you superstitious. I laid a small scrap of paper with a verse, "The Lord is my shepherd," upon the sill and left it there for 2 days. It disappeared. I began to catalog small losses, a wooden rosary given to me by my grandmother, the photograph from my baptism, the little brass angel the children had left as a present. Nothing expensive. Everything essential in memory. Each item that vanished left behind a quietness like an unstruck bell. There were also moments when Beatrice's eyes would move past me, as if remembering another sight. Once, at the table, she laughed at something Ricardo said, and then her smile folded into a shadow. She used to come to me with questions about prayer. She stopped asking. Maybe it's the grief, I told myself. Maybe it's the work. Maybe the house feels different because change crept in. I chose charity because I knew the cost of accusation. I carried my suspicions like a pocket prayer, small, folded, private. But suspicion is not only a thought, it becomes a pressure in the air. When they began to attend Pastor Miguel's church, the air changed. There was a crispness to the way they left in the evenings, a new vocabulary around the table: anointing, vision, deliverance. Words are small doorways. Some doors lead to light. Some open onto other rooms. I met Pastor Miguel at a community luncheon once. He smiled the comfortable smile of a man with a calling. He spoke of harvests and growth. I listened, and I held to the careful knowledge that good fruit is tested by time. Churches grow. People seek meaning. I could not know then how a spirit of grabbing would dress itself in prayer. I remember Ricardo coming home one afternoon carrying small bundles wrapped in cloth. He said they were for cleansing. Beatrice did not question him. She placed them on a small table near the bedroom door, and the cloths looked like offerings. I smelled unfamiliar herbs in the house that night, not the rosemary or bay I knew for cooking, but a deeper, sweeter smoke. Maybe it's a folk thing, I thought. I have never despised folk prayers. I sat with the thought and prayed, Lord, give me discernment. I returned to the kitchen tasks I had always known and tried to let prayer be my first response. Discernment is not an armchair philosophy. It is a practice of waking and listening. It became, for me, the work of bending close to the small sounds of the house and learning which were honest. I learned to notice the difference in footsteps. A foot that moved with guilt carries a different weight. A laugh that is rehearsed leaves an aftertaste. There is a way a home smells when it is loved: lemon and coffee and the faint mercy of soap. When something else arrives, incense not used here, the sweet oil of a stranger's ritual, the house registers it like the skin remembers a stranger's touch. I began to keep a journal again at night. Not to write down accusations, but to make careful notes of the pulse of the days. Small things accumulate into patterns. On a Thursday, I wrote, red cloth at back of fridge. Herbs not mine. Beatrice quiet. On another day, rosary missing. Asked no one. I know this sounds like a woman's anxiety made a list, and perhaps it was. Yet a list is also a way of asking God to notice what we cannot bear alone. I started to pray with a different persistence. I read the Psalms aloud, and I let my voice be a lantern in the house. I anointed the doorframes with a little oil and muttered a blessing I learned as a child. The oil smelled of orange peel and of Concordia, the brand from the small store on the corner. It was humble work, but it steadied me. There are neighbors who walked past my gate and did not see anything unusual. There are others who looked, and I think they felt what I felt but could not name it. I do not like to go about frightening people. I like, instead, to guard them with quiet prayer. I began, in the soft hours, to call on former friends who had a steadier eye. Cecilia is one such friend. Cecilia's voice on the line was a balm. She is the kind of woman who names what she sees without making noise. When I told her, she said quietly, keep your watch. Bring me when you need to, and I will bring Gabriel too. Gabriel is her nephew and he is a lawyer, though he is also a man who knows how to keep a household calm. I did not tell her everything at once. I told her the truth as I could hold it. It felt strange to plan in secrecy. I would set the table with care and light a candle before dinner. A candle resists the wind. It does not triumph over it by force but by remaining alight. I would whisper, "Stay, little flame," and the flame would answer by tending itself. I taught Beatrice to fold napkins the way my mother taught me. Once, she delayed and wrapped one napkin around another like a secret. She had begun to carry her phone like a talisman rather than a tool. That is the measure of distance, how we hold devices and how we hold people. There is an intimacy to keeping house for someone. You learn the small ways they like their coffee and the timbre of their step. You learn the cadence of their breathing. Living under the same roof is a kind of covenant, legally mundane but morally binding. One evening I sat on the back steps as the heat of the day cooled. The sky went a slow purple. I thought of Eduardo and how he would have told me to be patient, how he would have said, "The Lord sees." I wept then, not in despair but in release. I said aloud to the heavens, "I am tired, but I am not alone." The voice that answered was the ordinary breeze, and the ordinary breeze I took as kindness. It was in that season I began to gather small allies in the community without making an announcement. I asked for bread from one neighbor and she brought more than bread. She came with an old prayer and a willingness to sit. I asked a young pastoral woman in the church down the street some questions about doctrine, not naming names, and she answered with the clarity of one who has not pawned her convictions. Small alliances are like secret lamps. They do not demand completion, only trust. When the day comes that light is needed, it is the little lamps that join into a blaze. I did not want a blaze born of anger. I wanted warmth that would see the truth. I say these things because someone might wonder how a woman of my years gets to the point of confronting a hurt so near to home. It is not a sudden bravery. It is a long harvest of quiet courage, the kind that grows when you refuse the easy lie. I want to pause here and thank you for listening to this part of the story. If you are watching this channel and it helps you, please consider subscribing. We are a small community trying to reach 1,000 subscribers to keep sharing these testimonies. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, city and country, and I will pray for your place by name. After that small pause, the house continued to keep its secrets. One afternoon I found, tucked behind the old record player, a little red cloth tied into a knot. It smelled faintly of myrrh and had a short note sewn into the hem. The note had only one word, written in ink: remove. The word read like a verdict. I did not go to them that day with accusations. I sat with the cloth at the table and I prayed over it. I took clean water and rinsed the cloth as if washing away what had been put upon it. The cloth bled a dark residue into the water. The color of the residue was not one I would have expected in a household like mine. That night, the house felt smaller. Even my old chair seemed like an intruder. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and opened the Psalms again. The words steadied me, "The Lord will keep you from all evil." I repeated them until sleep took me. You may have noticed that I have not spoken ill of anyone yet. I am careful because people are both less and more than the choices made through them. The great error is to equate a person entirely with the evil done through them. The spirit that misleads is not the same as the person misled. This distinction would become crucial in the weeks ahead. The ordinary kindnesses persisted. Beatrice, on a rare morning, made me coffee and left it steaming by the Bible. The gesture felt like hope. She did not speak of the priests or the visions that had been offered as explanation. She spoke instead about a struggle at work and the heavy kindness of a co-worker. Those moments are what kept me from losing the thread of tenderness. Still, the balance had shifted. The house had a new rhythm, one that asked devotion in a currency I did not understand. I found myself measuring where love ends and leverage begins. The line is faint and sharp at once. One evening, As I folded bed linens, I found a loose page from a small, tattered notebook. On it was a phrase written in a cramped hand: "She must bow." The page was not mine. It froze me like water on a cold morning. The sentence was not a prayer. It sounded like instruction. I kept the page hidden in my Bible and I prayed more fiercely. The act of hiding it felt like placing an object under a protective mantle. I am old enough to know that hiding things does not destroy them. But sometimes it keeps them from being used. The next week, while listening at the door to the faint hum of voices beyond the living room, I heard Ricardo's voice say the word land, and then expand. I heard the word donation and a number. Money is a practical thing. It is also a mirror of heart. When a church leader speaks of land with the warmth some give to bread, that warmth is suspect. The evening light through the kitchen window became a kind of test. I would watch how the shadows moved through my house and where they lingered. There came a tension between the visible and the invisible. I felt watched by something I could not see but suspected through scent and sound and tiny absences. The battle lines began to draw themselves on the map of our lives. I ended this part of the story with a simple resolve: would not cower. I would not accuse without careful witness. I would prepare. I would pray. I would keep watch. But the watchfulness must be practiced on the small ordinances of the house. I began to read aloud each morning and to set aside a place at table for truth. I put an extra cup and a clean napkin as if expecting not an enemy but an honest conversation. I could not yet name how the conversation would begin. I only knew that the time of testing was near. Soon enough, the first direct sign would come, and it would show me not only a shadow but the hand that held it. The calm had been broken. I felt the house holding its breath just before a bell rings. The change did not announce itself with thunder. It began with small things that have the capacity to unbalance a life. A spoon that was once where you left it refused its old home. A chair creaked with a new complaint. The ordinary becomes uncanny when it no longer fits the shape of your trust. I began to notice the way footsteps moved through the morning. Beatrice's step used to carry a softness, a careful pace that matched the light. Now it came and went with briskness, as if she were answering a call I could not hear. Ricardo's laugh took on a quality like a closed window being slammed shut. It was not a loud sound. It left a resonance in the room like a low bell whose tone you do not expect. We ate at the table, but the conversation thinned. Food is usually an offering of presents. It became a ritual of timing. Ricardo would say, "I'll eat at the church," and his voice carried an ease I did not understand. Beatrice would meet my eyes and then look away as if every look carried a hidden ledger. One afternoon I set 2 plates and waited. He returned late and sat at one end of the table and seemed not to see the space where I had set my bowl for him. His hands did not reach across the plane as they used to when he helped himself to the hot stew. The dishes sat between us like a map of difference. There are tensions that are human and ordinary: money, pride, fatigue. There are other tensions that are like a current running under the floor. One of my neighbor's children came by and said, "Your rosary is missing." I had been unaware until then of how often those small talismans are the things that tie us to memory. I found a journal in Ricardo's drawer one afternoon. I do not like to rummage, but the heart has a way of needing evidence. The book lay under his shirt and inside were phrases that looked like scripture but stitched with a different pattern. My name appeared more than once with annotations: remove presence, interference. The ink was steady and deliberate. My hands trembled when I read. Not from fright, but from the ancient ache of betrayal. It is one thing to suspect. It is another to hold a paper that has named you like a verdict. I confronted nothing then. I folded the journal and placed it back where it had been. I wanted to test what would happen if I did nothing at all. How would truth move without acceleration from my fear? So I worked slowly both in soil and in keeping guard. There were neighbors who began to look at me with something like pity. They would say, "Are you all right, Sister Diana?" as if looking at a small injury. I would smile and say, "Yes, I am holding." I learned to hold my saying lightly. The heart grows brittle when it must speak only into waiting. At the center of our days was the object that would become a symbol, a small, battered photograph that had survived the years on my mantle. It was a picture taken at a long-ago family gathering. The edges were frayed. No one knew the exact date, but everyone knew the face within it. One week it sat with a pin stuck through it. Pins are small violence. I picked up the photograph with my careful fingers. The pin came out like a confession. On the back of the picture someone had written in a rushed script, "Remove influence." A photograph had become a target. When the icons of memory are violated, the attack has a face. That night the house hummed differently. The lights seemed dimmer despite the same bulbs, as if the air itself had thickened. I slept and I woke in the middle of it, not from noise but from a presence like pressure. I went to the living room and found a candle stub melted onto the Bible stand. I picked it up and found a smudge of something dark at the base. My breath turned inward like a bell being rung. I called Cecilia then. Her voice was immediate and low. "Bring me what you find," she said. "Do not show it to them." The tone in her voice was not sensational. It was precise. She advised restraint and witnesses, two small luxuries when one is fragile and near to sorrow. I began, under her counsel, to watch with an eye that was not frightened but steady. Where before I may have followed the heart's first leap, now I mapped the facts. A map of facts tends to calm the imagination. But facts, when assembled, tend to paint a picture you cannot ignore. One evening, I overheard a short call. Ricardo spoke and used the word purge in a way that made my stomach tighten. Purge is a fierce word. It is not hygiene, it is clearing with the violence of intent. Voices have power, words are spells when they are given with fervor and a ledger attached. The friction between me and my daughter could have been simple grief, generational distance. But it took on a sharper contour when other hands wielded language as a tool to divide heart from home. Beatrice began to think of the house as a place to be fixed rather than treasured. She began to speak of sacrifices needed for the ministry. I did not know when ministry became a ledger rather than a calling. There were moments of sweet ordinary grace. Breakthroughs of tenderness. Beatrice would come to my chair and sit, not to speak of doctrine but to fold clothes and to hum a tune we both knew. Those moments reminded me that the human heart is not monolithic. The same person who receives a strange doctrine can also plait a towel with care. But small acts of kindness did not cancel the larger pattern. The pattern was a slow creek that had grown a current. I began to anticipate the bank where it would overflow. On a rainy Thursday I stayed up late and took a walk through the rooms. The house is different at night, it speaks in small noises. I placed my palm on the window glass and watched the rain like a curtain. There was a smell of something in the rooms that did not belong to laundry or kitchen. It was a scent that felt ceremonial. That afternoon, in the private drawer of the bedroom Beatrice had used as a desk, I found a small envelope with a sealed note. The outside was marked with a date and with initials I did not recognize. I opened it. There was a list of properties and a rough estimate written in a hand that was patient but a little hurried. There were amount sums that would buy land. There was also a phrase, "Only needs removing of hindrance." The paper was cold in my hands. The word hindrance was a word that turned me inward. I thought of all the small ways my presence had been reframed as a problem rather than a balm. The handwriting was not frantic. It was businesslike. That night I sat with a lamp and read it until the edges blurred. I placed the paper into an envelope and slid it under the Bible where I keep the small notes of thanksgiving. Hiding is not the same as forgiving. It is a way of keeping what you need safe until you can see a way forward. There is a way to speak of the spiritual realm with careful feet. I am not one for spectacle. My faith is a domestic faith. But when a thing is done under your roof with intent and language and sums, then the matter is half legal and half spiritual. Both require witness. I began to notice also the micro-tensions between neighbors and the new church crowd. One neighbor, Rosa, brought over food and then made a casual remark about new colors coming to our street. She smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. It was not malice. It was human fear wrapped in politeness. Another neighbor, a man who used to repair shoes, avoided my gaze and began to take calls away from his open shop. Each small movement is a stitch in a larger cloth. I found that the house, the neighborhood, and the world beyond were rearranging themselves around a whisper of gain. One night, as the moon tilted silver above the roofs, I heard a phrase I had not anticipated: "We'll make it holy, and then they will not resist." It was whispered with a warmth that made my blood run cold. Not because of anger, but because the invitation to erase is often given with the smile of salvation. I confronted Ricardo once, but not with the fury you might imagine. I sat and asked him plainly, "Who taught you to say that I am a hindrance?" He answered at first with a small laugh and then with that rehearsed calm. He said, "The pastor had a vision." He said the house carries something. Vision, when placed in the mouth of a leader, is both shield and sword. His eyes did not harden like a stranger's. They were the eyes of someone who was moving through a kind of buying and not having yet seen the cost. In that moment, pity sat like a stone in my stomach. People who are misled are as lost as the ones who mislead. I wanted to reach out to him, not to strike. Yet the wound of betrayal is real. The small domestic wars widened into decisions about the living room, about the time they spend away, about the small things that turn big. I began to live with a carefulness that was not aria but work. I will end this part with a point of clarity that tightened like the string of a bow. The shadow in the house had a hand. I could feel the hand shaping the world around my daughter's marriage. The hand had a name and a place. It was near. I had to decide whether to expose it in public or to call my friends and prepare the way of truth quietly. The decision, which would lead to the next chapter, posed a new kind of fear, not of being alone, but of making a choice that would change the lives of those I love. The house held its breath. I listened for the sound it would make before the next knock. Who would answer when I called the name of the shadow out loud? The question would be the hinge of the days to come. The truth arrived like rain, slow at first, then insistent. I had made a habit of listening to the house. I know its breaths, the way the floorboard near the kitchen moans when the night is heavy, the small click the back door makes when someone comes home with a conscience. That evening the house spoke in a language I had come to mistrust. I was folding shirts, one by one, when my hand brushed something hard beneath a pile of winter clothes. It nudged my palm like a secret. The fabric was thin and dark. I remembered the closet as a place where clean smells lived, soap and lavender and the faint dust of sunlight. This smell was not of the house. I eased the box out with careful fingers and set it on the bed as if it might break. The wood was old, carved with a small star that had once been pretty. The lid was lighter than I expected. When it opened, my breath shortened. There was my face in a photograph, pinned with something cold and fine at the eyes. The pins were precise, surgical. Underneath the photograph lay hair, neatly folded and tied with a cord black enough to drink light. There was a small glass vial that held a liquid darker than the coffee I had brewed that morning. It did not reflect light, it seemed to drink it. There was a moment where a person can choose to be small or to be monstrous. He shifted. Those are things of the church, he said, because he had learned the vocabulary of safety. His voice was parchment thin with practiced calm. Those are things of yours, I replied, and the words were quieter than I meant them to be. I had 1,000 protests kept behind the ribs, but restraint had the better weapon, patience. My patience had served me in sorrows and in weddings. It would serve me now. He tried to cloak his surprise with instruction. You shouldn't go looking in private things. Have you ever thought maybe private things should not be used to hurt the people you live with? I asked. It fell like a pebble and made a small circle in the air between us. He smiled in a way I had seen once before, the smile of a man who had been taught to rehearse anger into civility. The pastor sees what the eyes cannot, he said. He told us this can be broken. It is not for sale, I said. And it is not for terror. For a second his face unhooked from the mask. I saw a flash of the man I once knew, a son who used to lift a fallen cup for his mother. The glimpse lasted a breath. Then the mask was back. You should trust the process, he said. We are only doing what's needed. The word process felt clinical. I thought of cattle led to pastures they did not know were fences. I thought of prayer turned into procedure. I kept the box closed and placed it back where I had found it. Prudence, I had learned, is not the same as cowardice. That night the house did not sleep. The radio in the living room, Eduardo's old radio, hummed low with a broadcast I did not tune. The voice on the air murmured about deliverance and offerings and sacrifice with a cadence that mixed scripture and salesmanship. The lamp in the hallway flickered once, like a pulse. I sat on the steps and breathed as the rain started soft against the roof. Rain is honest, it does not claim more than it gives. The smell of wet earth reminded me that life returns. I lifted the Bible from the small table and opened it until my thumb found the nice worn page of a psalm I had read so many nights it felt like song rather than text. I traced the words with a fingertip like a prayer bead. But sermons and theologies clutter the heart when the betrayal comes closest. I had to know the story the way God knows stories, with witnesses. I thought of Cecilia and her soft, unshakable voice. I thought of Gabriel, her nephew, who knew how to hold more than a church argument. He knew law and calm and the kind of civilized insistence that can hold a man accountable. I made 2 small calls. I did not say the whole of it. I gave the facts like one gives medicine, minimal and precise. Come tonight, I said to Cecilia. Bring Gabriel. Do not speak to them. There is a difference between exposing and unmasking. Exposing shouts. Unmasking is surgical. It takes discipline. It takes the courage to stand in the open and let the wind decide how the paper moves. I wanted to let the wind move the paper this time. I wrapped the box in a clean cloth and placed it beneath the Bible. It felt like laying a patient to rest before the operation. The house settled in a way that made me think of a held breath. The neighbors' dogs quieted. Someone in the block turned a late-night radio down. There was a small, tense expectancy like the moment before a bell is struck. Midnight came and passed. I did not sleep, exactly. I prayed and sang small lines I had kept like roots. The Lord will fight for you, you need only to be still. It is a phrase I say with my hands as much as my mouth, a folding up of the soul. I clutched it and let it be a pillow for my doubt. In the thin hours I heard them whispering in the other room. Ricardo's voice flowed low. My daughter's voice was frayed as if she were trying to stitch something in the dark. They were speaking of vision and breakthrough and everything will be aligned. The words tasted like exchange. My heart ached for the daughter who had once asked me, from the hallway, how to fold a napkin. The following morning the air in the house had a new weight. When Beatrice touched the teacup my hands had left steaming, she flinched as if the porcelain had been hot in a way that was more than physical. I watched her and tried to read the woman behind the hush. She looked at her husband and did not look at me. Love can be porous. It can let influence pass through like water through a sieve. There are moments when the world becomes a ledger. Names become line items. Prayers become transactions. I remembered how Eduardo used to say that prayer is never currency. It is communion. He would have been furious at the way the word offering had been folded into threats. He would have said firmly, prayer cannot be coerced. That afternoon I went back into the closet with a different steadiness. I took photographs, receipts, the little slip of paper with my name scrawled on the edge of a budget line. I made a careful inventory, not as evidence of accusation but as testimony for a heart. A ledger is only useful when it reflects the truth. When Cecilia and Gabriel arrived, the house breathed a little freer as if new lungs had been given. Cecilia's presence is like a bell, it rings clarity. Gabriel carried his calm like a cloak. We sat around the table with the box laid between us like a small unmasked thing. Gabriel's eyes moved over the sums, the transfers, the notes in haste. This is not only superstition or zeal, he said, his voice even. This is manipulation and possibly extortion. The numbers tell a story beyond faith. I felt a strange lightness. Not because I had been vindicated, but because the facts had names now. To name something is to make it tangible to prayer. The spiritual battle remained, the human one was now plainly there as well. That night I took an action that felt both ancient and modern. I anointed the threshold of the house with a drop of oil I had blessed years ago. I walked the rooms with a candle and the slow cadence of a psalm. Each doorway received a small, spoken petition. I did not need to shout. My voice, low as a chord, threaded the rooms with a presence. Where there is light, the dark rearranges. Where there is truth, falsehood shrinks. I felt neither triumphant nor naive. I felt like a woman who had found the map to a place she had always lived and was now asked to defend. The revelation had given shape to the ruin, and shape can be mapped. The questions now were precise. Who had spoken? Who had been spoken for? And how would the house be returned to the quiet work of living? The answer would not come like thunder. It would come like the careful untying of a knot. I was ready to begin. The night was heavier than the ones before it. Rain had settled into a steady prayer against the roof, and the lamps threw soft halos that made the rooms feel like vessels. I lay awake and watched the ceiling as if scripture could be read there. I am not given to dramatics. I have broken breads, stitched hems, and mended hearts with the steady hands of routine. But that night my hands felt like small instruments beside an unmeasured tide. Grief does not always announce itself with weeping. Sometimes it arrives as a hollow in the chest, an absence shaped like a chair. My chest felt hollowed and yet full of a certain resolve. I prayed with a voice that was both whisper and anchor. Lord, this house is yours. Keep what you have put here. Memories came like quick, small films. Eduardo's laugh at dinner. The slow way he would knock soft on the back door. Beatrice leaning on his shoulder at a funeral, the world reduced to the small business of being present. These were not just recollections, they were the ligaments that held me to life. They steadied me in a way that anger never could. There is a physicality to fear that most people misname. It is not always shaking. Sometimes it is a coldness in the knees, a compression behind the eyes, a taste of metal in the mouth when someone you love is being sold a lie. I felt each of these like weather. I breathed into them and allowed prayer to be the clothing I wore against the cold. I measured the hours by the radio's breath. The broadcast from the pastor's channel had picked up in the living room. There is a difference. Accountability is the room in which trust can be rebuilt. As the day deepened, small neighbors came by. Rosa carried a pie and that simple, watchful kindness that people show when they have learned to be neighbors in storms. She glanced at my hands and said nothing. Cecilia sat with me and held my wrist with a steadiness that had no words. "Do not let them make you the odd one in your own house," she said, and her mouth was the shape of a blessing. "You are not alone in this." I thought of my grandmother and the way she would have sat and simply peeled an orange until the kitchen smelled like citrus and patience. There is a holiness in domestic acts. They are a prayer without spectacle. I peeled an orange then and let my fingers remember small rhythms. Night came and with it the long vigil. I lit a candle and set it on the kitchen table. The flame was a deliberate, stubborn thing. It did not shout. It said only, "I remain." I began to speak aloud the scriptures I had long known, as if the words themselves could rearrange the air. A neighbor's clock chimed and somewhere a child cried. Life continued its ordinary insistence. At 2 a.m. I heard a sound that made the blood rearrange itself in my chest, the soft, methodical moving of furniture. It is a quiet sound, like the scraping of a plan into place. I moved to the doorway and looked down the hall. The corridor was a river of shadow. From beyond their bedroom door came the murmur of voices, the cadence of prayer turned into instruction. I knelt on the floor and did something I have done as a habit and as a weapon. I prayed aloud, not for spectacle, but to fill the rooms with a different frequency. I read the Psalms and not the florid parts, but the parts that hold a household steady. My voice was a small thing, but it was honest. Lord, make a way where there is no way. Bring truth to light. Give my daughter eyes to see, and a heart to come back. The sounds in the room changed after that. The voices that had been low and urgent drifted. There was a rustle of clothing and a door closed softly. I felt as if a hand had passed through the house and touched every shelf. That touch was not the wind. It was prayer. At dawn, the world felt washed. Beatrice came to the kitchen bearing 2 cups of coffee. Her hands trembled a little when she gave me the cup. Her eyes held an exhaustion that was not only from movement. There were nerves frayed by more than lack of sleep. She looked at me as if she was measuring whether I would be the same person who had always made the coffee. "May," she said simply, and the word was a thread. "I am sorry for the trouble. There are apologies that are small. There are others that are the opening of a wall." Her apology trembled between both. I took her hand around the cup and let the warmth of the ceramic convey what words could not. "We will find our way," I said. "We will not be hurried into a decision that breaks what is good." The next day I found a page from a small notebook tucked under a cushion on the sofa. The handwriting was cramped and patient. It was not reckless. It read like a map not yet completed, lists of properties, sums, dates. In the margins, a note, "Only needs removal of hindrance." The phrase landed in me like a stone in glass. The hush of the house amplified it. I read it again and again. Hindrance. The word softened the wickedness of what had been planned. To them, I had become an obstacle on an economic diagram. To me, I was a mother, a keeper of a home, a woman whose life had been built in small domestic holiness. To call that hindrance felt like calling the sun a blockage. That afternoon I walked the garden and pulled weeds by hand. The dirt under my nails grounded me in a truth that paperwork could not deny. You remove a weed by the root or it comes back. Quick force lessens the work. Slow perseverance endures. I pulled one root at a time and thought of patience as a descendant of prayer. As evening closed, I prepared for a night that I knew would not be quiet. There was a plan in me now. It had been formed not out of anger but out of a slow obligation. I would call certain friends. I would gather witnesses. I would not be a woman who learned only to defend, I would learn how to restore. Before the sun sank, I sat alone for a while and read a line I have come to hold as a small sword: "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." I repeated it until the letters arranged themselves into muscle. My heart steadied. When the knock came at the door that evening, I felt a calm like the sea before the tide turns. Cecilia and Gabriel entered with a small folder and faces made narrow by purpose. They greeted Beatriz and Ricardo with a civility that felt like armor. We moved through pleasantries like people who are rehearsing peace. Dinner was served and the table looked modest and careful. Plate and cup, napkin folded with a hand that remembered many weddings. The pastor arrived later than he said he would. He wore a neat suit and a practiced smile. The air tightened like a string when a hand plucks it. "Let us pray before we eat," he said, as if that request were a claim. He tried to take the lead and, for an instant, the old muscle memory in me reacted. But I remembered my plan. I lifted my hand gently and asked simply, "May I lead tonight? In my house?" The question was small and firm. It shifted the room. His brow tightened in that particular way of men who cannot win a room that should have been theirs. He did not refuse. He had been called to a table he had intended to direct. He sat instead with that thin, practiced smile and a look that held embarrassment like contrition. I prayed not to show power but to stitch a seam. I spoke words of truth that were not loud. I asked God to shine a light in every heart and every motive. A light is not a cudgel. It is an invitation. When I finished, there was a pause long enough for the air to become a witness. "Before we begin," I said quietly, "there are things we must put on the table." I placed the folder, the receipts and the photograph and the box of small things where everyone could see. The pastor's face arranged itself into a small thunder. The night moved then into a space I will never forget. Confessions came like thin threads unspooling. Faces changed as if masks were set aside. Tears, when they came, were as honest as rain through glass. The darkness had been heavy, but the night had become a place of visitation. In the long dark I found something that felt like dawn. When the last word was spoken and the last shoulder had been held, the house exhaled. It felt cleaner, the way a riverbed feels after stones are turned. We had not won by force. We had opened the rooms to light and let it do its work. The night had been a pilgrimage through fear toward a rest that was not naive but present. I fell asleep with my hands folded over the Bible and a small piece like a shawl across my shoulders. I had been wounded. I had been tested. But I had not been broken. The night had given me a new kind of authority, a quiet one, earned by keeping watch and by refusing to let the truth be traded for promises. The day after the confrontation arrived like mercy. Light moved through the curtains in a way that made the dust motes look like a slow choir. There was an ordinariness to it, the kettle, the neighbor sweeping his stoop, and that ordinariness felt like a benediction. Restoration does not always show up as trumpet. Often it comes as normal life returned to its duties. I spent the morning in small acts of consecration. Not spectacle, but work. I washed the linens twice and let the sun take any lingering scent. I opened the windows and walked each room with a jar of oil I had blessed years ago. I let a small drop be a sign at each threshold. My fingers knew the ritual as if memory had been rehearsed in them. It is a curious thing to plan against something that has a face and yet is spiritual. The plan must speak two languages, the practical and the prayerful. I had both. Gabriel had prepared letters and advice. Cecilia had come with psalms and a calm that is not performative. Between them we fashioned a dual defense, witness and worship. Before the evening, the notes scrawled like a blueprint of possession. I did not shout. I described. I asked for explanation. He tried to call it rituals of deliverance. He tried to make the words of harm into a language of care. We were casting out what was there, he said. We were opening the door to blessing. I looked at him and saw not a demon in flesh but a man tangled in his own past, a man whose hunger had been dressed as calling. Blessing, I said, is never built on fear. It is always given and never taken. My voice did not need to be louder than the truth. Cecilia, with the steely softness that makes her so faithful, spoke then in a tone that cuts through pretense. She named things I had not the courage to say aloud at first, the pastor's past dealings, the pattern of small idolatries dressed up as spiritual counsel, the ways in which power colds the heart. Her words were precise as a scalpel and given with mercy. Gabriel stepped forward with his legal voice, calm and clear. He spoke of extortion as a possibility, of the lines that seemed to be crossed. He told him gently that a shepherd who takes from the flock in the name of God has set his feet upon a dangerous path. The pastor shifted in his chair as if truth had flinched him. It was not a victory by spectacle. It was a dismantling of a lie by steady exposure. The pastor began to unravel not with a dramatic confession but with the slow disassembling of the story he had been telling himself. I thought I needed to be larger than I was, he admitted. I thought if I held this, if I had this, I could be certain. I was wrong. There is a moment in such confessions when a human heart becomes painfully visible. You see the child who once wanted approval and the man who sought power. I spoke to him not as one who wants to condemn but as one who wants to heal. You are not too far for mercy. But there will be consequences that speak truth. There must be repair. Ricardo sobbed then, and I felt a layer of pity and disappointment move through me like a draft. His breakdown was not a triumph. It was a human knuckling under the weight of what he had helped create. Beatrice's face was a map of grief and relief. She came to her feet and moved to him, and the two of them held each other like people who are learning how to be honest again. We prayed. It was not a prayer of triumph but a prayer of mending. I laid my hand on each of their heads and asked God's presence to settle. I did not conjure words to shame. I asked for courage and the willingness to step away from the patterns that had taken them. That night, when the last plate was cleared and the chairs put back, the pastor sat across from me and said, I don't know how to make this right. Begin where you are, I answered. Confess honestly. Seek counsel. Make restitution where it is due. And step away from a place that demands from what cannot be paid. He looked small in the honest lamplight. I saw how much the hunger for power has the face of fear. People who exploit desire disguise it as zeal. The work of exposing is not to crush but to redirect. In the days after, things shifted as slowly as furniture settling after a house is moved. The pastor closed his church for a while. He sought to reconcile his past where he could. He returned to a smaller ministry that did not require the acquisition of land. I do not know all he did. My concern was nearer and dearer, the healing of my family and the safety of our home. Ricardo began to attend council with a man from a different community. He listened. He repented in small ways, by coming home earlier, by sitting at the table without a phone, by learning to fold a napkin as his father-in-law had once taught him. It was slow and it was human. Beatrice and I rebuilt conversation like one mends a torn seam, with gentle, repeated stitches. There were moments of awkwardness, of course. Trust when broken does not slip into place like a button. It requires the care of repeated acts. There were days when I had to practice brevity in conversation because the rawness between us was too tender. There were also days when the simplest gesture, a cup of tea left by the chair where I read, felt like a sacrament. I kept praying for Ricardo and for the pastor. I do not think of a man in the same register as of an enemy when he repents. I see a person who has been caged by hunger and who is learning there is more grace than gain. My prayers were not naive. They were firm. Mercy without accountability becomes indulgence. Mercy with accountability becomes a path toward integrity. My house, too, settled back into its work. The photo with pins was returned to a place of testimony, not threat. We held a small blessing for the home, invited a neighbor who keeps his gate open and a woman from the church down the street who knows how to speak scripture with compassion. We declared publicly what had been made private, that our home would be a place where candor lives and manipulation is not tolerated. There is a peculiar lightness in that kind of repair. It is not the absence of scars. It is the presence of seams. The house now carried its stitches like a well-used garment. They were reminders, not stains. Months passed and life resumed its cadence. I continue my mornings with the same psalms and the same cup of coffee. I still set a place at the table with the old care. There are Sundays when Beatriz and Ricardo go to a congregation where the word is taught plainly and where giving is a joy and not a coercion. They are learning, and so am I. What I learned in all of this is not new only because it is old. Power can wear the robes of piety. Greed can walk behind a song. The task of discernment is not to become suspicious of every prayer meeting but to be wise about the fruit. If the harvest is bitter, ask who planted it. I also learned that confrontation, when guided by love and by witnesses, is not destruction. It can be the path that clears a room for healing. I have found that the house of God is not in buildings or plots of land but in the space where truth and mercy meet. That house is where I have built my life. I will not pretend everything is neatly resolved. People reshape slowly. Habits return like weather. I remain watchful. But watchfulness is not fear, it is stewardship. I will keep watch for my daughter, for my family, and for the house that has held our small mercies. I tell this story not to paint myself as hero but to share what I learned in the quiet after the storm. Courage can be soft. Truth can be offered with a ladle of mercy. Restoration begins when someone says, "I was wrong," and another replies, "Then stand and be mended." If you find yourself in a place where light and shadow are confused, remember, witness matters. Prayer holds weight. And love, when it is steady, can unmake the most carefully disguised of lies. The table was small, the light softer than I would have chosen, but it held enough warmth to steady my hands. I set the last plate down and felt the weight of the evening like a breath held too long. I had arranged the chairs so that nothing could be moved without notice. The room felt measured, as if architecture itself were listening. The kettle had left a faint steam on the window, and the curtains shifted in a hush I invited, not feared. I began with a prayer that was ordinary on its face. It was a calling of names and a calling of light. It was a request for clarity, not for spectacle. There was a pause after I spoke, the kind of silence that counts more than noise. The pastor adjusted his tie as if to tighten a story he had been rehearsing for months. I opened the folder slowly. Paper is a blunt thing, but it tells the truth plainly. Receipts, bank slips, a photograph turned into an accusation by pins, all of it spread out like the underside of a plan. These were hidden, I said, my voice even, as if I were reading a list at church. They are not offerings, they are transactions with intent. He looked at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into mercy. His smile trembled and did not find purchase. Words he had used to bless our table fell thin on his tongue. Cecilia watched him with eyes that do not miss the thread of a lie. She did not raise her voice. She layered her words like prayer. "This is not the work of a shepherd," she said. "This is the work of a man who turned hunger into doctrine." The pastor's fingers. For a moment he looked not like a pastor but like a frightened boy who had been taught that power is safety. The room held both his fear and the small cracking of an edifice. Ricardo sat very still, the color gone from his face. He had been the instrument. Now he was becoming a witness to his own hand. There is a particular sound a man makes when the story he told himself collapses, a small animal sound, half breath, half sob. Beatrice's hands were folded on her lap. I could see the tremor of shame behind her chin. She had been taught to equate sacrifice with salvation, and now the equation had been poisoned. Her eyes darted between us as if trying to find a way back to herself. "Why did you give?" I asked, not to sermonize but to understand. "Why did you allow these things to be done in our house?" Ricardo's voice came out raw. He said it was necessary. He said if we wanted blessing, we had to let go. He said she was the hindrance. The word landed like a stone on glass. Hindrance. As if a human life could be reduced to an obstacle in a ledger. Cecilia closed her hands and said a short prayer under her breath, not for spectacle, but to hold the room. Her presence was a steadying thing. In crises such as these, steadying is a kind of prayer. People are rarely only prey or only perpetrator, I said, looking at Ricardo with a tenderness that surprised even me. You were taught a lie. You were taught it in pieces so small you could swallow it. I did not wish to break him further. I wanted to break the lie that had used him. There is a difference between wrath and justice. I sought the latter. The pastor found his voice again, thinner, more defensive. He spoke of deliverance and of the cost of ministry. He spoke of need with the same cadence one uses when asking for permission to claim a thing. It is dangerous, I said quietly. When faith begets commerce, the altar becomes a market. The room hummed with truths each person had to reckon with. There were names to be reconciled to actions. There were confessions to be weighted against cruelty. There was the small, human wreckage that follows when doctrine is used as ledger. At one point the pastor stood and began to pace like a man arguing with his own history. He confessed, not all at once, but in pieces, as if the truth were a long-stretched garment he was finally willing to fold. I thought, he said, that by taking I could become more useful. I thought that certainty could be purchased. The confession did not come like a thunderbolt. It was a slow unbuttoning. But unbuttoning can be the beginning of unmaking the garment of sin. I asked him then, with the soft firmness of someone who has seen the coast after a storm, will you step down from that which gives you power over others until you have answered for what you have done? There was no theatrics in that request. It was the simplest possible boundary. A boundary is not punishment, it is a gesture of containment so healing can enter. Silence stretched. He swallowed. The house seemed to hold its breath with us. Gabriel spoke about legal steps in measured tones. He did not threaten where mercy was necessary, he simply placed options where previously there had been only intimidation. His words made the pastor small in a way compassion had not. In that tightening, Ricardo began to weep, not the quick of embarrassment but the long, ragged toll of a man who finally hears how he has wounded those he loves. His shoulders shook with the force of regret. Beatrice rose and went to him. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was a small gesture of two people remembering each other under the rubble. We were told lies, she whispered. We were deceived. We prayed then, not as a triumphal chorus, but as a room that needed wind. Cecilia led, her voice a low and steady tide, calling for repentance and for restitution. My own prayer was short and sharp, for truth, for courage, for the ability to make right what had been broken. Never the posture of triumph. Always the posture of repair. When prayer had drawn a soft veil over the edges of the night, the pastor's confession widened. He named the names of the old work he had mixed with the gospel. He told us of nights of bargaining and of a hunger that had nothing to do with bread. I listened and felt a strange mixture of pity and resolve. Mercy does not erase accountability. Mercy is an invitation to repair. He agreed to step back. He agreed to return any money he could account for. He promised to seek counsel and restitution. He promised, in the quiet that followed, to close the doors that had allowed darkness inside his own heart. Even promises, however, are fragile. I knew the work would be long. Religious habit hardened like limescale, it must be scrubbed with small, patient acts. Promises are only maps until footsteps follow them. As the evening wound down and plates were cleared, I set down one last thing, a simple candle I had lit hours before. Its flame had resisted a draft all night, quiet and consistent. I left it burning until the last person left, as a sign that light endures when tended. The pastor left with shoulders stooped but with a certain clarity I had not seen when he arrived. He did not leave unmarked. He carried with him the consequence of exposure and the first steps of contrition. Outside, the night was the same as it had been before we sat at the table. But inside, something had shifted like ground settling after an earthquake. Not everything was steady, but the surface had changed. The foundation had been reset. I washed my hands slowly at the sink and felt the ache of the day in ordinary muscles. There is a holiness in small, clean acts. They repair the edges of a person in ways that words sometimes cannot. Before I went to bed, I walked through the rooms and blessed them aloud as I had been taught. My voice was small but sure. I did not speak to condemn, I spoke to reclaim. The night held new quiet, less heavy this time and more honest. I lay down with a prayer that folded like a hand over my chest. I slept lightly, as one sleeps after setting a thing right, not because the world is safe, but because truth had been invited back into the room. A new day would require new vigilance. The confrontation had been a hinge. What it opened needed tending and not just admonishment. There would be conversations to follow, boundaries to keep, and gentle, repeated acts of repair to restore trust. And there was one thing I knew beyond the doubt. The work of disentangling a soul from power disguised as piety is often longer than the work of exposing it. I had begun the long work, others would have to choose whether to continue. There is a season of exposure, and there is a season of tending. I was ready to live in both. The morning after the confrontation felt like waking into a house that had been aired. Light found different angles on the furniture and the dust mote seemed to float with purpose. I moved through rooms with the deliberate attention of someone who had been entrusted with something fragile. Breakfast was quiet and honest. Beatrice made 2 cups of coffee and set them down with a steadiness that still shook at the edge. We did not rush into explanations. Some truths need to be lived into rather than announced all at once. There was a silence between us that was not empty. It was a silence of people relearning one another. Small gestures became vows, a plate left warm, a chair pulled in close, a question that asked only one thing, are you staying? Hearts rebuild in tiny increments. I wanted to give them the room to do that work, but I also knew repair must be coupled with guardrails. Mercy without prudence can be an invitation back into old patterns. Later that day Gabriel came by with a stack of letters and an expression sharpened by duty. He spoke plainly about steps we could take, document everything, arrange for receipts to be audited, speak with the appropriate authorities. He reminded us gently that spiritual abuse often travels in the tracks of financial wrongdoing. I watched Beatrice listen with a face that was turning into someone learning what it means to be accountable for love and for betrayal. She had been groomed in a certain theology of sacrifice, and undoing such teaching is a slow and tender thing. We organized files and lists. We made copies of the receipts and put them in envelopes labeled with dates. These were small administrative acts. While I worked, I spoke a prayer that was a list, for truth to find its way, for compassion to be sharp and not soft, for broken things to be set into a groove where repair is possible. Prayer, in its most practical form, becomes intention stewarded by action. At dusk we invited a woman from the neighboring church to come and bless the house. There is truth in rituals that are not showy. They stitch the edges of a life. We placed a small bowl of salt by the threshold and anointed the doorframes with oil. Each act was simple, domestic holiness, the kind that resists theater. That night I sat with Beatrice after she had tucked the covers around the children. The house had a smaller, more careful quiet. We spoke of things that had not fit into sentences the night before: humiliation, fear, the sense of having been sold a story that cost more than was paid. I wanted to be part of something bigger, she said, voice low. I thought giving was how you trusted God. You were taught a ledger instead of a gospel, I replied, keeping my own voice steady. There's a difference between sacrifice and being exhausted into obedience. She laughed then, a short sound that was not bitter. It was the sound of a woman who recognizes the wrongness of an idea and yet knows it will take time to rearrange a life around truth. We prayed together then, a quiet prayer not of condemnation but of reclamation. I asked that she learn to love herself in the same way she loved God, with boundaries and clarity, not always emptying herself for someone else's gain. In the days that followed, the pastor complied with some requests and resisted others. He returned money in fits and starts, leaving envelopes anonymously on a car seat or with the office secretary. His restitution was uneven, and we had to keep watch. Restoration will not be neat, it will be relenting in increments. Sometimes repentance is theatrical, the sort that shows itself in grand gestures. That kind of repentance can be a front. Gabriel taught me to look for the small, consistent acts, early returns, open records, willingness to remain accountable in public and private. There were nights when I feared the house would be quieted by gossip, when people who had invested hope would choose the easier story and the pastor's people would circle around him for protection. The human tendency to protect our idols is old. But there were also signs of real change. The pastor met with an elder from a nearby church who had neither agenda nor audience to keep. He sought, haltingly, the counsel of those who did not worship his charisma. He admitted certain things in those private rooms that never made the sermon notes. Ricardo began to attend a men's group that was not led by a prophet but by someone who kept meticulous time and practical lessons. He learned to sit with his shame before the group and to name the lies he had believed. That is a brave thing, to say the name of the lie aloud. Beatrice and I started to rehearse ordinary kindnesses again. We placed the Bible on the kitchen table and read a psalm each morning. There is power in repetition and in small liturgies. They form us back into a family capable of telling the truth. Faith without accountability becomes superstition, Cecilia said one afternoon, folding laundry at my side. And superstition becomes a temple where men can set their thrones. She was right. The work now was to shape a faith that could be held in the hand and given away without cost to another's greed. It must be generous but not gullible. There were awkward dinners and conversations that felt like rehabilitation. We learned how to disagree without severing love. We learned how to say no and remain kind. It was not always graceful. I stumbled. Beatrice stumbled. But the stumbling became our slow, human choreography toward repair. At times I would catch Ricardo in the kitchen, hands busy with a tea towel, his eyes full of the freight of shame. He would begin a sentence and then stop as if he had forgotten how to finish it honestly. I would hand him the towel and say nothing. A towel becomes a small sacrament when it is offered without sermon. The children returned to their routine play. They did not need to be told the full story. They needed pancakes and attention and the steadiness of habits their grandparents once taught. Children hold repair in the smallness of daily acts. Months had a way of smoothing edges. Not all scars fade. Some become maps. Our house began to wear it seems like a familiar coat. We had conversations now that were not incendiary but practical. There was a new clause in our family vocabulary: we will check the accounts. It sounds mundane, and it is. Mundane is often holiness in disguise. I kept praying for the pastor. I prayed not because he deserved it, but because the grace of God is not rationed according to merit. Mercy does not void justice. Mercy and accountability must walk together like two steady hands on a ship. One afternoon, a letter arrived for me. It was short, handwritten by a person I had once trusted to lead us in worship. He wrote to say he had left his church to seek help. He wrote of nightmares that kept him awake and of images he could not unsee. He asked for prayer and for a chance to make right what he had done. We are taught that repentance begins with confession. Yet confession is only the beginning. The path beyond confession is paved with repeated acts of humility. This man had begun to walk that path. That was all that could be asked. In the quiet of an evening some weeks later, I sat with my Bible and a cup of tea and I reflected on what had changed. The house had been defended not by the hardness of my will, but by the steadiness of witnesses and the insistence of truth. Clergy title had been tested. It had not withstood the weight of evidence and the honest bearing of community. There remains a vigilance. Trust is not a switch you flip, it is a lamp you keep stoked. I keep my lamp trimmed, not to distrust, but to keep from being blinded. That is a different posture altogether. I do not pretend everything is mended. There are days when old teachings rise like mildew in the corners. There are times when the temptation to believe in an easy miracle will visit Beatrice like a gull. We talk through it. We name it. We choose again the slow work. And yet there is a softer music to our house now. Laughter returns without the edge of anxiety. Meals are shared. The Bible is read aloud at breakfast sometimes, not as a prop but as a book that has learned to speak in the smallness of our lives. The work continues. But the horizon looks less like an approach to a storm and more like a field after rain. The soil is still wet. It will need tending. But seeds have been planted where weeds once grew. Light finds a way to the places that were dim. 3 months after that long evening, the house wears its history differently. Scars are still there, but they are no longer secret. They are seams visible marks of mending rather than stains of shame. Life does not return to what it was, it becomes something else, tempered and careful. The pastor closed his doors for a season and sought counsel outside the echo chamber of his own pulpit. I do not presume to know all the work he will yet do, but he stepped away from the stage he had built. Withdrawal is not redemption, but it is a beginning when paired with honest labor. Ricardo and Beatrice now choose their congregation with eyes that have learned to ask for transparency. They sit in places where giving is taught as joy and not as transaction. They have rebuilt limits that look like small fences around garden beds necessary and kind. I watch them relearn one another with a tenderness that is wary and hopeful. What this trial taught me is not new doctrine but a lived wisdom. Authority without accountability is dangerous. Titles are thin things beside the weight of a person's actions. True spiritual authority is humble enough to be questioned and generous enough to repair when it harms. I learned that confrontation can be an act of love. I learned that exposing a lie is sometimes the only way to let mercy breathe again. I learned that the languages of law and of prayer can walk together, that one does not cancel the other but clarifies it. There are mornings I still wake to the echo of that night. I do not awaken afraid. I awaken watchful. Stewardship looks like presence, not suspicion. It looks like a grandmother's hand on a child's shoulder, steady and sure. If you find yourself on, the measure of it is not how loudly we proclaim, but how faithfully we tend the garden we have been given. Where there is light, the shadows move. Where there is witness, truth has room to breathe.